On behalf of the Book Loft of German Village, I'm delighted to welcome you all to a virtual event celebrating the release of The Wedding Season by Katy Birchall. Four Weddings and a Funeral meets the wedding party when Freya, a recently jilted bride, is forced to attend 7 weddings in one summer, and her friends devise a series of challenges as a distraction. From getting stuck in an old church bathroom and needing to be rescued by the vicar, to making out with a barman at a French chateau, Freya realizes that despite herself, she might just be having fun. By the time the final wedding arrives, she'll discover that the road to a happy ending sometimes has unexpected detours, and that perhaps her own love story isn't over just yet. Today, we are joined by author Katy Birchall. She has written numerous books for young readers and is the former deputy features editor of Country Life magazine. The Secret Bridesmaid is her first adult novel and her American debut. She studied English literature at the University of Manchester and currently lives in London. We are also joined by Kerry Winfrey, who writes romantic comedies for adults and teens. When she's not writing, she is most likely baking yet another batch of cookies or watching far too many rom-coms. She lives with her husband, baby, and dog in the middle of Ohio. Her next book, Just Another Love Song, comes out this August. Katy, Kerry, I'm so excited to have both of you here, and I'm going to leave the floor to you.
Thank you. All right. Hi, Katy. I am so happy to talk to you about The Wedding Season because I loved it so much. I laughed so much. Like there were so many laugh out loud parts. Like Maddie mentioned the part where Freya got stuck in the bathroom. That was definitely one of my favorites. But there were just so many great lines. And one of my favorite things was how you started it. Like you started with Freya, your main character, about to get married. And then she gets dumped the day before her wedding. And not only does she get dumped by her fiance, who she's been with for 12 years, but she also gets dumped in a broom closet. So it's like the ultimate indignity. Um, so I would love to know, like, if you want to describe what else happens in the book in your own words, besides like from where we go from there, and tell me how you got the idea for this.
So I'm so glad you liked it. It's so basically the book is it does have some romance in it, but it's really about someone who has this kind of breakup out of the blue right at the beginning, and then she sort of learns how to find herself again through her friends who kind of come up with all these tasks because she's in her 30s and she's got a summer of weddings ahead of her, which I certainly am still going through now. And if you're going through a breakup and then you have to go to all these weddings and you want to be like really happy for all your friends, and that's what Freya wants, but she knows she's going to find it very difficult. And her friends sort of set out a series of tasks for her to do it to complete at each wedding so that she can kind of enjoy herself and not have to focus on her own heartbreak, basically. So that's the story. And the way it came about was I wanted to write a book about a woman sort of finding herself again and coming out the other end of a heartbreak, because I feel like most people, I know some people are really lucky and end up with their first love, but most people experience a heartbreak, and they certainly experience one that maybe they're not expecting. And it can feel like at the time it can feel incredibly lonely and incredibly upsetting, but there's always sort of some hope there that you will get through it and your friends who surround you will help you. So I really wanted to write a novel about that, and I thought that the breakup before the wedding was a nice dramatic way to start.
Yeah, it's always good to see, like, have your character start at their lowest possible point, like just total rock bottom. I've started a book with a breakup before too. It's like it's a good starting point because really things can only go up from getting dumped in a broom closet.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. The only way is up.
Yeah. So your previous adult romantic comedy was also about weddings. So are you a big wedding person?
Um, it's sort of weirdly. I've been I've been bridesmaid many times, and I absolutely love it. And The Secret Bridesmaid, that definitely came about when I think I was bridesmaid like 7 times in the same year. And that really inspired, because all of the weddings were just so different. And I thought that weddings are such a great place to set a book, because so much can happen, like so many things can go wrong. You can introduce loads of different characters, so it's a really fun sort of setting for a book. And then the wedding season, again, I think at the time when I was pitching both the books to my editors here in the UK, I was really sort of in the wedding zone, especially through lockdown as well, because all of them were then pushed back, and it was like very difficult for all the brides. But my next novel is not going to be about weddings, and is completely different. So I'm moving out of it now.
So both of your adult books have come out during the pandemic. I mean, last year was more like during the height of things.
Yeah.
So what has your pandemic publishing experience been like? Because you have other books out from the before times, and so do I. And I know it's so different publishing right now.
Yeah, it's really different. It's really difficult, I think, especially as a debut coming out sort of during COVID, and it's now ongoing. But certainly my last book coming out then was very difficult, because it was very different. There was no launch, and the market has been quite fluctuating throughout COVID as well. I do think, though, I don't know whether you found this, but obviously like rom-coms have definitely become, I mean, they've always been a source of comfort to people. And I feel like they're kind of having another moment, especially on screens as well. Like, people are realizing that actually everybody likes to laugh and likes to have a nice, warm, happy ending. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. So in some ways it's been a very difficult publishing experience, but in other ways I think it's been nice to sort of know that people are looking for rom-coms now a bit more maybe than they were before, because they want that comfort.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's been my experience too, because I know that's what I turn to when I feel bad. You want to read something where there's a guaranteed happily ever after. Like, you're going to watch somebody go through it, but they're going to end up okay. And like, that source of comfort is just so nice to be able to get from a book or a movie.
Yeah, definitely.
So I also wrote YA before turning to adults. I thought you have a lot of young adult and middle grade books, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay. So I would love to know, what made you decide to go into the adult market?
Well, I'll have to ask you the same question. For me, I don't know whether you found this, but I mean, I love writing for children, and I love my teen and YA audience. But I think because I love rom-coms so much, like I love reading rom-coms and I love watching rom-coms, and I kind of wanted to write something for my friends and myself that we would enjoy, reading, that I wanted to see on the shelf myself. So yeah, I thought it was like a fun new challenge, and I was really, really nervous about when the first one came out. It was so different. I don't know whether you found that as well.
Yeah, like I didn't even consciously go into the adult book world, but I had this idea, and the book was called Waiting for Tom Hanks. And it was about someone who's obsessed with Tom Hanks movies. And it would not make sense for that to be a very young person, because I don't know, like, do teenagers even know who Tom Hanks is? I don't know. And so it was kind of like it just had to happen, And you're right, though. It is nice to write for people your own age, because you can kind of use your own references and not worry that people aren't going to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But have you noticed a lot of other differences between writing for adults and kids, like just in the way things are marketed, or in the way way people talk about your books?
Well, certainly the writing process was different. I really things like including characters drinking alcohol. Things like that was like so bizarre to me, because I certainly don't do that in my children's books. And the language you can use and the longer chapters, like it was all, the writing process was so different. And yeah, I think I mean, it's a very different market. The children's market is quite difficult to sort of build up a following. I'm hoping that with rom-coms, like people are so loyal, and once they've read one of your books and they kind of know what they're getting, that hopefully they sort of, every time you bring out a new one, they know, like, I don't think there's any problem with a book being predictable if it's a rom-com, because like people want that happy ending, and that's what you're giving them. So I'm hoping that that's, like it's going to be an exciting sort of way of building an audience, is that loyalty. But yeah, no, the publishing, again, like I've had a bit of a bizarre one because of COVID. So I don't know. I'd love to do a sort of launch at some point, and then like adults can come. I'm used to doing like a kids, so that will be fun.
Yeah, I agree with you about like writing characters who can drink and curse. And also like I don't know what your YA books are like, but mine were kind of rom-coms too. And just writing for adults, you kind of have the expectation that these characters will probably stay together. Like that's kind of what you're going for. Whereas with YA, I don't know, I just kind of leave it a little bit more open-ended. I'm like, these people, they're 16. So who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, oh my goodness, with one of my series, I started the first of the three. Now I started, and she was definitely into one of the love interests, and it was always him. And then in the third book I switched it. I was just like, no, I wrote the whole thing, and then I was like, no, this doesn't feel right, she's meant to be with the other one. And honestly, people who wrote in and they were like, what have you done, you've ruined it. And I was like, I'm sorry. It wasn't right.
That's amazing. But yeah, that's how things are when you're that age, right? Like things can change. You can still go through some pretty big changes. Well, in the wedding season, one of the things I loved is, so Freya gets dumped by her partner of 12 years, Matthew, and like he only gets up the courage to break up with her the day before their wedding, which is obviously so awful, and that sets off the whole chain of events. But I thought he must have been such a hard character to write, because you have to make him pretty terrible. Like he's kind of the villain of the book, if there is one.
Yeah.
But then you also have to make him sympathetic, because if he's that terrible, the reader won't believe that she had been with him for 12 years.
Right.
So how did you construct a character like that, where they had to be so terrible and also so sympathetic?
I think that, you've absolutely nailed it on the head there. Like, people are so complex, and that, I guess that's what we love doing as writers, is sort of writing these complicated characters. And I needed him to make this awful decision very last minute because of the drama, and it set off the plot of the novel. But at the same time, I certainly, without giving things away, I do give him a voice as well, to make sure that he's not this completely one-sided character, evil villain, because people aren't. There's always a motivation and a reason behind what they do. And in some ways what he did was very, very cowardly, and obviously we kind of hate him for it, because Freya did not deserve what happened to her. But at the same time, I think as the novel goes on, you kind of see that in a way it was quite brave, because at least he didn't go through with the marriage when he knew it was wrong. So there are sort of two sides to it. But yeah, writing him was really difficult, because the idea of sort of making that decision and leaving it until the last minute, you have to be a sort of certain type of character, I think, to keep going, even though it's wrong, and then suddenly the day before deciding to pull the plug. So he was a difficult character to write, but I liked writing him because I kind of had to force myself to see things from his point of view.
Yeah, and you had so many characters like that, like so many that were really complex. Like Freya's mother also like has her good qualities and their bad qualities, and they have kind of a complicated relationship. And there were just so many good, funny side characters. Like I love Ruby and Leo and all of Freya's friends. So which of like the side characters was your favorite to write?
Oh, that's a difficult question. You're mean. I I loved writing Ruby. I love writing female friendships. I'm sure you feel the same with your books. I think that for me, female friendships in particular have been a sort of rock in my own experience. So I guess I really enjoy sort of celebrating those. So Ruby was a really fun character to write as well, because she's such a sort of strong kind of she's a real character. She's quite eccentric. She was very fun to write. I also liked writing the relationship between Freya and her dad. I think we see a lot of mum-daughter relationships in rom-coms, and obviously like they're very, very special. But I wanted to sort of celebrate single fathers as well in this book in particular. So he raised her and her brother, and I wanted their relationship to be very special and celebrated as well. And he's a kind of lovely character, really, in his own little world. So that he was quite a nice one to write, pottering away in the countryside.
I know, I loved him and his little pond that he kept talking about. That was so cute. I could totally picture him in my head. Yeah. So Freya's friends, Ruby and Leo, they come up with, like, to get her over her heartbreak and keep her distracted through the wedding season, they come up with a task for her to do at every wedding. So did you have all those tasks in mind, like before you wrote, or were you like coming up with some of them as you went?
I honestly, this is one of these classic things where I was like, this is a great story. And then I started like plotting it and I was like, what have I done? I maybe did 2 tasks and I was like, oh God, I've run out of ideas. So that's when I went round to a friend's house. I very lucky, I lived down the road from my best mate. So I went round to her house, and her and her boyfriend, I sat down with them and we had a glass of wine, and I told them the idea for the book, and then we sort of started like brainstorming ideas for wedding season tasks. So they came up with a few of them, so that was really helpful. So I did mention them in the acknowledgements. They got they got thanked because they earned it.
Yeah, no, I've been there before too. Like you come up with this idea and you're like, this will be a great structure for the book. And then you realize like you have to then come up with that structure. Like you kind of painted yourself into a corner.
You have to actually do the work and you're like, what have I done?
Yeah. And it was probably really fun to write those, given that you're writing them during the pandemic, when obviously it is harder to have those big celebrations. Like I went to one wedding last summer, like right when things, like everyone had just gotten vaccinated and things were going really well. And it was like the most exciting thing in the world. I was like, oh my gosh, after all this time. So it must have been really fun to write like all these big fun celebrations with tons of people.
It was like, I think weddings, I mean, maybe I'm biased, so I really love them, but I love weddings. I just think they're this sort of really special day where everyone is in a good mood. It's miraculous. And for that one day, you can kind of forget everything else that's going on in your life. You're all there for the same reason. You want to celebrate this couple and their marriage. And it's always like lots of celebrating, like wonderful food, drinks. Everyone's like happy. Everyone looks nice. It's a real kind of escape for a day. It really is. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun writing all those different scenes, and also celebrating all the different cultures that you can bring into weddings. And I guess like everyone's different visions as well, you know, like all these weddings are always completely different. So it's really fun to bring in people's characters' personalities through the weddings that they have. So yeah, I did have a lot of fun, and especially after, I mean, lockdown in London was certainly as awful as I'm sure as it was where you are. But, you know, so it was nice to kind of write something where it was hopeful that would happen again soon in the future, which it did.
Yeah.
They're back.
And weddings are also so good because like you get people from every part of your life, and then you usually end up getting them like really drunk in a contained space. So there's so much potential for drama. Like anything can happen. All these people with different personalities, and all of a sudden they're all together.
And it's never the ones you expect. Like you always think like, oh, that person's going to go off the rails. And then suddenly it's like your cousin that you didn't think you had it in them. they're like on the table and you're like, yes,
I know.
seeing you now.
Yeah, always surprises at a wedding. So I would love to know, and I know that like the pandemic has kind of messed up everybody's routines, but do you have a writing routine? Like, is there a way you always start your book, or are you like a write every day person?
I have I do have a really strict routine. I think because when I went freelance, or when I became a sort of author full time, I was really worried about getting into a sort of pattern of like lying in and not like getting up and doing the work. So I was quite strict with myself. So I definitely do a kind of full day's work with like a 1 hour lunch break, sort of as though I have a boss who I always joke is my dog. I have my dog is my boss. So I make this joke like 100 times. And yeah, so I do have quite a strict, and then I try not to work weekends if possible, except when I'm on a deadline. And then I've always ended up working weekends. But yeah, that's what works. But I know other people have very different routines. So what about you? How do you write?
Oh gosh, like I wish I had a better routine, but I have a son who's now 5 years old, and he's just finishing up his last year of preschool. He'll be going into kindergarten next year. So then I really will have more of a routine. But like right now, he's in school for a couple hours a day. So I like try to cram everything I have to do into a couple hours.
Yeah.
And then that's obviously very difficult to cram your whole job into a couple of hours on a weekday when he's not sick, when school's not closed. So honestly, it's usually just a real mess. Like it's generous to say I have a routine at all.
Well, that makes sense for you. And I guess like children, what can you do? You have to work around them. Yeah.
Exactly. Like they do not care if you have a deadline, but he like also wants to write his own books now. And he told me the other day, he was like, Mom, I have to get my book done by Saturday. And I was like, why is that? And he's like, well, you have deadlines too. And I was like, oh, this is your deadline. And I was like, well, do you want to ask for an extension? And he was like, what's that? And I was like, you just asked me for more time. He's like, yeah, I'm going to need an extension.
Cute, as if he's like getting into deadlines already.
Yeah, exactly. So he'll be ready if he ever really gets into publishing. So were you like, I was kind of like him when I was little. Like I always wanted to be a writer, and I was always making my own little books. Did you want to write when you were a kid, or was this like an adult goal?
No, I always wanted to write. I have my mum has kept all these newspapers. I used to write family newspapers called the Birchall Times. And I sort of came up with headlines and everything. So I think I definitely always wanted to be a journalist. But then I always loved reading. It was really the only thing I was good at. I'm not really good at anything else at school. So I think it was, I think being a writer was all I ever really wanted as I grew up. So I've been really lucky.
Yeah. Who were the writers who made you want to be a writer when you were a kid? Like what were the books that you loved to read?
Meg Cabot.
Me too. Yep, that's my number one. That's what I always say.
So she basically got me through. So I changed schools at 13, which is quite an odd time to change schools. Here, usually people change schools at 11. But I was at this school that went up to 13 for some reason and then changed schools. And I went to this new school and I found it really hard to fit in because everyone had kind of made their friends because they'd all started together at 11. And then I was like this random new person at 13. And I remember being just so like scared all the time. And I used to read like the Princess Diaries and listen to the audiobooks like over and over. So I always credit like Meg Cabot getting me through like a really like stressful time when I was trying to fit in. And Mia, of course, like never feels like she fits in at school. So I remember like seeing myself in those books. So Meg Cabot was definitely, and Louise Renison, the wonderful Louise Renison.
Mm-hmm.
Her books, Angus Songs and Full Frontal Snogging, I loved. And also things like Just William. I was a really big fan of Just William and the Just William books, and of course Roald Dahl again.
Yeah. Yeah, every little kid who likes to read has to, be into Matilda for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, all of us
Yeah.
in the shoulders.
Yeah. Oh, it's so funny that you said Meg Cabot because yeah, she was like my number one. I would also reread the Princess Diaries books, but especially the one where like Michael builds her that video game and to like tell her that he likes her. And I was like, this is the height of romance. I was like, I still feel this way. Like if I could ever write something that good, I could just be done. Like that would be my career.
Is that book 3? I think that's book 3, is
I
it?
think so. Yeah.
Book 3 and book 4, I think what was book 4 I loved. I think that's when like she's trying to work out if he is in love with her or loves her as a friend or something like that. I remember it's a really funny distinction. Yeah. Oh, and she has like other series as well, which are just so good. But the
You know,
series was,
she's always so funny. I would love to have her career. Well, speaking of that, are there any authors whose career like you really admire where you're like, I would love to be like that?
um I guess Meg Cabot is probably like top of that list. Just because she's still like she's been writing for just so long and producing all these like such a variety of rom-coms. So I know she's written like historical romance as well. Um, so yeah, I think she's definitely up there. But then some like contemporary authors as well, like Dolly Alderton is one of my favorite writers here in the UK, and she sort of does a brilliant job of writing these fantastic novels, but also kind of essays about her own life as well. Which I really admire because I don't think I'd ever be able to write anything like that. It's too personal for me. I don't know, do you think you'd ever be able to write sort of essays on your own life or experiences?
Like I would love to because I love writing essays, but my life is not very interesting. Like that's the problem. Like I can write an essay on like something else, like books or movies, but like nothing that interesting has happened to me.
Same, yeah. So yeah, no, I think they would be up there. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. It's such a good question, but yeah, I guess Meg Cabot kind of sums everything up.
Yeah.
Just to keep writing, that's all I want. Just to keep writing forever, and probably writing rom-coms. Although I would quite like to write a murder mystery. I think.
Oh my gosh. That's weird because I feel the exact same way. Like I love reading like thrillers and mysteries. And I'm like, I hope one day I can write one of those, but I don't know if I can plot one out. Like it seems so much harder than a rom-com.
Yeah. Have you read any Lucy Foley books?
No, oh my gosh, I just got one from the library though, because everyone always says they're so good.
Yes. Can you let me know when you've read it? Because she's brilliant. I love her murder mysteries. I'd love to write something like that. But like you say, like I don't know whether it would be so hard to plot. Like how it's just so complicated. But maybe they say that about rom-coms.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's the thing. Like in a rom-com, you know how it has to end. Like it has to end with the characters together.
Yeah.
And then like in a murder mystery, it's like a lot can happen. And like when I'm reading a murder mystery, I'm such an easy reader. Like everything surprises me. I'm just like along for the ride. And I'm never trying to poke holes in it. And I was like, maybe that's not the right personality to write one. I don't know. Maybe I need to be more discerning.
I know when you get to the end and you realize and you're like, wow, like how did I miss all of these clues? I am not a detective.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be a terrible detective. Well, I would love to know what has been the most surprising thing for you about being a published writer?
Ooh. I think the most surprising thing, I guess it's really the ups and downs. That's what's really surprised me about being a writer. I think when you become a full-time writer, you're kind of like living the dream in your head, because that's what we always wanted, is to be a writer, and we get to do it, and we're just so lucky to be here. But it's really hard as well, and I don't think being a full-time writer means it's very isolating. It's a really lonely job, which is fine because you're in your own head, and I need silence and everybody out my way, so I like that sometimes. But everyone has days when work isn't quite like when you get writer's block, or it's not quite working for you, or like you hate the chapter, or you've read your book and you think it's awful, or you're looking at your sales and maybe they're not as good as you'd hoped. and stuff like that, I think that's like the really difficult side of writing that you maybe don't expect. And I think even the most best-selling, brilliantly published authors, I think they still go through that even now as big bestsellers if they get a sort of bad review or anything like that. So I think that's what surprised me the most, is that I always thought it would be like once you've got your books out there, then you just keep writing and everything's fine. But actually, there's a really tough side to it as well. But that's, the same with every job, isn't it? It comes with highs and lows.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like before I published, I thought, oh, you publish that first one and then it's just smooth sailing from there. But you're always facing like rejection or disappointment, no matter how many books you have out.
All the time. Yeah, I think I was reading a really interesting thread on Twitter the other day by a writer who was saying, and they've published several novels, and they said, just so everybody knows, I've just had my manuscript that's been out on submission and it's been rejected by all the publishers. So I'm, back to starting again with a new book. And she was like, I just want everyone to know that, even when you're published, you can still be rejected, which is so true. It's certainly not plain sailing as soon as you get there. But there's also like the really highs, like when you hand in your manuscript finally, which I cannot wait for this new book. I cannot tell you. I'm on chapter like 10. I'm not even halfway there, and I'm like, oh God, what have I done? I just want to write this.
I feel like there's always that moment, like kind of when you're in the middle of things, where it's just like, no.
Yeah. It's up again, but like when you hit the middle bit and you're like, oh no, maybe this isn't very good, and then you have all the doubt.
So I don't know how much you can say about it, but what are you working on next?
I'm another rom-com.
Good.
And it is due to be out next summer. And I don't know what I can say about it, to be honest, but it's not about weddings. And it's an enemies to lovers.
Oh, that's one of my faves. Yeah.
No, I've been wanting to write one like that for a while, so I'm glad to get around. It's just so fun writing that, like the banter and then sort of the hate, and then it's going to happen. That suddenly it's going to click. But anyway, I won't tell you anything else.
Well, good. I'll be looking forward to it then. That sounds great. Okay, so I have one more question. What advice would you offer to someone who's just starting out in their writing career?
The advice I would offer is something that I did not do myself, and I wish I had, which is to get someone else to read your work. And it's such a big ask because it's incredibly vulnerable, to write something and then show it to someone else. Like it's so difficult, and I really struggled with that, and I couldn't do it myself. So I completely understand that it's like a really big deal, but it is so important to get someone with fresh eyes to look over things and sort of give you advice on what you might have missed or another idea that would make it even better. So I would say that's probably like my biggest piece of advice, is just to make sure someone you trust, who's not going to be judgmental, who's just going to read it as a book that you've written. I think that would probably be my best piece of advice. What would yours be? Turning the tables.
Gosh, I don't know. It is a hard question, but I mean, that is good advice because it always helps to have someone look it over. But maybe mine would just be like, just read as much as you can, and not even just in your genre, because I feel like sometimes I get the best ideas for things when I'm reading other types of books and being like, but what would this be like as a romance, or like watching a movie or something?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like even when you're reading a book that you don't like, or a bad book, it's always helpful for your writing because it kind of tells you what you don't want to do,
Yeah. And you sort of get ideas from anywhere. Like inspiration can literally come from absolutely anything. So yeah, well, even murder mysteries. Maybe we'll move into murder mysteries, me and you. This could be our new thing.
I'm hoping someday. Yeah, young adult and adult rom-coms and murder mysteries. Just normal career trajectory.
Why not?
Yeah. Well, okay. I think that's all I have. So we can throw it back to Maddie.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for this absolutely lovely conversation. It's just fantastic. Also, Katie, knowing that your next book is going to have an enemies to lovers arc, I'm just call me because that's like my favorite thing. It gives me life. Thank you so much for your great questions, Kerry, and thank you, Katie, for sharing your delightful new book with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
You.
I encourage all of our rom-com lovers tuning in to pick up a copy of The Wedding Season. We will have a link below to purchase a copy of the book. Thank you again, Katie and Kerry, for joining us today, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. Take care, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.